Hi, this presentation is going to look at the relationship between population and inequality. We're going to divide our conversation between two forms of inequality, between nations and within nations. Between nations, of course, we're going to study the hierarchy outlined by world system theory, and then within we'll look at such things as the Gini coefficient. If we look at between nation inequality, this map shows some general patterns. Some of the lowest income countries are in yellow. We see those in Central Africa, parts of Southeast Asia, Eastern Europe to some degree, and also parts of Latin America. On the other end of the spectrum, the darker colors, we find in North America, Western Europe, Oceania, and also parts of the Middle East. Over time, we see that it's a little less straightforward in terms of GDP growth in economic development. So we see, for instance, if we compare low to middle and high income countries, that the group experiencing the most growth is actually the middle income countries, as they've transitioned from being poorer to wealthier with an average annual growth rate of 6.2%, the doubling time just a little over a decade for countries to double the size of their economies. After that, high-income countries between 1990 and 2014 had a threefold economic growth with an annual rate of 3.8% and a doubling time around 2 decades, a little less. In the low-income countries, what you would hope to see quicker rates of growth for low-income countries actually rival or less than the high-income countries. So the low-income countries, in terms of population, that's where we see nearly all the population growth. Demographic transition theory suggests that as countries become middle-income countries and high-income countries, that the growth rates decline. So you would hope to see a higher growth rate here because that would indicate moving through the transition. But the lower growth rate implies being stuck in transition, and that means stuck with larger populations. And not just overall population size, but young population. We can shift to a focus on within nation inequality, and demographic changes are important for understanding those. For example, in a study of the United States, Bishop et al. Identified some key factors that shaped income inequality, and the two most important were whether or not a household was female-headed and whether or not there was college education. To a lesser extent, age categories and race categories also had an impact on income inequality. And this is just a graphic depiction of those findings over time from the Bishop et al. Study. In a study by An et al., they found that levels of income inequality were highly related to levels of life satisfaction. From 1997 to 2008, levels of life satisfaction decreased by nearly a third at the same time as income inequality grew. What's interesting is they also found a gender effect here, that men were more likely than women to report lower levels of life satisfaction in that time period. Other factors that were associated with having more satisfaction with life were whether or not people were married, whether or not they had insurance, and whether or not they had a pension. Another important related concept to within-country inequality is that of relative deprivation. It's a theory that suggests that it's worse to be poor in comparison to other wealthier groups within the same society. It's worse to have that situation than it is to just be poor on an absolute level where there are higher levels of equality. With absolute levels of global poverty, they're on the decline. That's the positive news, that the globe as a whole has been experiencing economic growth. We saw before that poorer countries were having a slower rate of growth, but they are growing. But as countries grow, particularly in middle-income countries, you can expect to see a higher level of deprivation as different groups experience growth differently. Some groups are left behind, and some groups are skyrocketing in terms of their personal wealth and income, and that's going to create more resentment and has major consequences for social conflict. And this is an observation that was made by Karl Marx as far back as 1847, and I'll let you read that on your own. You might want to pause the screen to take a look at that, but essentially it's the basic idea of income relative deprivation. And that's going to conclude our discussion of population and inequality. Thanks.